Hi folks, it's Professor Michael Tafel here. I'm back in the beautiful city of Rome, and this time around I want to talk about Rome in the 1300s. Now that might be a peculiar century to choose, but the 1300s is arguably when the city of Rome was at its absolute lowest point. Now, Rome has been a city for over 3,000 years. It's had many highs and lows. It was obviously the capital of the great Roman Empire. In the 1300s, the popes moved to Avignon. Now, why does that matter? Well, when the Roman Empire fell, the city of Rome redefined itself as the capital of the Catholic Church, and the popes always resided in Rome. Now, the Pope was not only the spiritual leader of all the Catholics throughout Europe, the Pope was also the mayor of the city of Rome. He had to take care of all the things like who's going to take out the trash, is enough water coming in, what are we going to do about the poor people? All that type of stuff that a regular civic administration would do was on the Pope's table. So when the popes moved to Avignon, there's no central leader in the city anymore. And all of a sudden, law and order completely breaks down. The major families like the Colonna and the Orsini are kind of ripping the city apart, fighting over territories and neighborhoods and businesses and things like that. Well, during this time, the people that are going to suffer the most are the average, everyday people that look to some sort of central government for justice, law, and order. They don't have it. And amidst all of this tumultuous times, we see a very enigmatic figure emerge, Cola di Rienzo. Now, Cola di Rienzo is going to get the title Tribune of the People, he's going to expel the nobility, and he's going to bring back the Roman Republic, at least in name per se. So Cola came from a simple background. His father was a tavern keeper, but somehow he got himself an education, and he became a notary. He was involved in local city politics, and he even went on an envoy to Avignon to plead with Clement VI, the Pope at the time, in 1344, to come back to Rome and restore law and order for the sake of the people who are suffering. Well, the popes didn't come back in 1344, but by 1347, Cola di Rienzo is being proclaimed Tribune of the People and restorer of the Roman Republic with the Pope's blessing. But Cola's rule only lasts for about 7 months, and he gets driven out of the city. But those 7 months he has in power and the time leading up to it are very, very interesting. And he even had powerful friends like Petrarch, who was very, very intrigued with Cola in this concept of bringing back the old Roman glories. So folks, in this little documentary, I want to kind of take a peek at Cola's life, what Rome may have looked like during his times. But I want to try to get to understand Cola a little bit better and understand what he was trying to achieve. Was he doing it genuinely to try to restore some sort of ancient glimmer of hope to the city of Rome and to the Roman people? Now, it's really easy to dismiss Cola di Rienzo because he only ruled for about 7 months and he has a very inglorious ending. But there are a few things about him that make him extremely unique for his era. I mentioned how Cola was a great communicator for his age, and he was very well educated. And, he writes letters to the different cities throughout Italy, calling himself the tribune of liberty, peace, justice, and the liberator of the Holy Roman Republic. Now that is a term. I've heard the term the Holy Roman Empire my whole life, but the Holy Roman Republic. And he accuses the Colonna and the Orsini, the two major noble families of Rome and the surrounding region, as being the new tyrants. He's also excellent at communicating amongst the people of Rome. Now this is the 1300s, folks, and he utilizes placards. Now placards is just kind of a fancy name for posters. We see them all the time, advertising concerts, political events, those types of things. In one of his placards, he mentions, in a short time, the Romans will return to their ancient buono stato, kind of telling folks that soon we're going to return to our old ancient Roman glories. His speeches are written down and they gain circulation amongst the population, and he utilizes a lot of the new lexicon of his age, the rediscovery of Aristotle. Thomas Aquinas is one of the great characters, and people really start discussing what a great society should be like. And Aristotle brings back these terms like libertas, against tyranny, the idea of freedom for the people. Now, of all the cities of northern Italy, Rome is one of the most unique because it's the seat of the Catholic Church and the Pope is kind of the mayor of Rome. However, during this time, as you know, the popes are in Avignon. And the Roman people have seen what's going on throughout the rest of northern Italy. And they did try to set up their own communal government or republic to kind of take on the power of the nobility. They tried it, I believe, in 1167, but they've never had as much success as, say, places like Florence or Siena did. The nobles still had all the power. So in some ways, you could say what Cola was doing was just trying to reestablish a solid commune, something to check and keep in check the power of the nobility and to offer power to the merchants, the bankers, and the big power players of the city itself. So you can look at Cola through that lens. In some ways, it's very difficult to imagine what the city of Rome looked like in the 1300s, because so much of the Rome that we know today was built up during what's called the Baroque era in the 16 and 1700s. But the Rome of Cola di Rienzo was a much different place. And there's not a whole lot of reminders of medieval Rome around. Every now and then you can get a glimmer of it through a church or an old tower of sorts, but a lot of medieval Rome is just gone. Cola was living during that time, and we must really use our imaginations to what it must have looked like. A lot of more primitive buildings, a lot of brickwork, but still the old ancient Roman monuments looming in the background. It must have had a type of dystopian feel in some ways, because the Roman buildings definitely reminded people of a much more glamorous and glorious ancient past where people could build these grandiose things, of which none of the contemporaries in the 1300s could replicate. And one interesting thing about Cola di Rienzo is the fact that he was able to read and interpret the different inscriptions on the old Roman buildings left behind. Now, he wasn't the only one to be able to read Latin, but for the most part, maybe it was like 1 or 2% of the population. But when Cola could speak with authority and point to inscriptions that mentioned the Republic or the people, it must have really given a lot of his ideas, as well as his declarations, a lot more authority, that it's backed by these old, ancient, grandiose ideas. Also, the idea that Cola decided to choose the title of tribune when he came to power. I mean, the tribunes were the ones in ancient Rome who kept the power of the senatorial class, or nobles, in check and gave people, the average people, a voice at the overall table. So it was a very strategic choice for him to choose the title of tribune. And once again, it was part of his whole agenda of trying to bring back ancient Roman glory. One of the things that really makes Cola unique for his age is the way he puts on shows and pageants for the people. Now, you got to realize this is a time before anybody has smartphones or the internet or TVs or movies. So anytime there's a speech or something going on in town, it's a big deal. And people who don't even really care will just watch it out of sheer curiosity. But if you can imagine, Cola, when he makes his rise to power, I believe it was Pentecost Sunday, he spent the whole night in the Church of Holy Mary hearing masses. So word got out that this man was hearing masses all evening. And then on Sunday morning, he emerges from the church in full armor with supporters and the support of the Bishop of Orvieto, who was essentially the Pope's vicar. And he's coming, proclaiming to the Roman people that he's going to essentially save them, that he's going to bring them a better Rome and really bring back the old ancient glories. Now, this must have been truly remarkable. And we hear about it from the few first-hand accounts we have that it did amass a pretty big crowd. Now, the historian Ronald G. Musto wrote a great book about Cola di Rienzo. And I want to quote a little bit from his book here. He mentioned that the Romans who filled the piazza and listened were no longer a passive mob, the victims or subjects of the barons, but now the agents and writers of their own history. The people of Rome, restored to their proper place, mingling amongst friends, neighbors, and strangers, all sharing the same sense of birth and renewal. And then he continues on and talks about how Cola writes letters to all the cities of Italy, trying to create a new kind of intercity parliament of sorts to kind of recreate the Roman Republic. But then he's also so knowledgeable on religious verses. He mentions, although we recognize that our own shoulders are too incapable and weak to bear the weight of such a burden, we also must openly realize that by the Lord this has been done, and it is wonderful to our eyes. So this quote here from the book of Matthew, all of the different elements that Cola brings in, remarkable. But it does pose another question. It's easy to put on the great show, to promise people the world, but will Cola actually be able to deliver?